So the paper that I'm going to be giving is called Such a Monster as I May Be Saved, Unnatural Mothers and Child Murder in New England, 1691 to 1768. It is about infanticide in early New England, but more than that, it is about the women who are executed for the crime and how their narratives are constructed. Yeah, it's a dark topic to get interested in the first place. So it was very much by accident. Doing archival work, I was looking for basically any sort of evidence of women's domestic or reproductive work in early New England, and I kept finding these broadsides about executions for infanticide. And they were kind of just fun sources at first. I didn't think that I would do anything with them. But the more that I read these print sources, the more I was finding exactly what I had been initially looking for in infanticide, which was domestic work, reproductive bodies, and labor. So I'm working mainly with cheap print, either broadside ballads or sort of dying declarations, execution notices. I'm also working with sort of longer pamphlet, printed narratives with sermons often, that had been given at the executions of these women. And I'm also working with their court records where I could find them or where they do exist, which is not for everybody. They were compiled by ministers who often included either their own observations or an anonymous third-person observations, which was probably their own, along with the sermon that they obviously authored. And then supposedly things written by the women themselves. A lot of them could not write but could read, so it will often say taken from her mouth. Occasionally it says taken by her hand. So the authorship, even when they say that, is obviously dubious. So I would say definitively it is written by a host of male ministers in New England. I guess what surprised me was what I didn't find in it. I expected these stories of infanticide to fall into some tropes that you see specifically in the literature that covers English infanticide in cheap print, which is like two main ones that over time it starts out with. A lot of these stories are sort of like monstrous women who are very inhuman, kill their children because they're evil. And then sort of by the 18th century, it starts to shift into this narrative of the seduced victim. A woman is taken advantage of and left by some evil man, and she falls into madness and ruin, and that's why she kills her child. And I didn't see that in these sources in the New England colonies. They'll often point to an element of monstrosity, which you can see in my title, but then throughout the actual text, they sort of contradict that, and the women at the heart of it are actually very complicated, and they are self-interested or logical or sympathetic, but they're never falling into one of these very stereotypical tropes that I expected to see. Well, I think that New England has been so heavily covered by historians because it is such a weird, interesting place. It's a very distinct form of Protestantism that really sort of just permeates everything, and the fact that these societies in this point in time are quite small, very face-to-face, it just fosters an interesting dynamic, I think, that I don't see elsewhere. And there's also a lot of women who are poor or enslaved, Native American or African women who really don't get talked about all that much in the existing literature, but were clearly very important parts of the society, living in houses, working with like major families that you hear about all the time. And I find that a really fascinating dynamic to look at. So all of my women I categorize as marginalized, which is a problematic term in itself. But by using that term, I am sort of trying to lump together a whole range of women who are often without kin or some like social power in some way. So several of them are African American, 2 of them are Native American, a couple are recent Irish immigrants, The rest are poor, unmarried, often working as domestic or indentured servants. And the one case that I have of a woman who is sort of a more, not elite status, but sort of maybe middling status. She is also a little bit older, unmarried. She had already had a bastard child, so she was already sort of subject to scrutiny in this society in the way that other more marginalized women were as well. Subjects who are often silenced in the historical record for a number of really valid reasons. They don't pop up in a lot of records that exist, and when they do pop up, like in my sources, their voices are highly suspect. So for that reason, a lot of the histories have sort of downplayed their agency and their often humanity by labeling them as sort of just tools of male ministers in this case. So I think that what I want people to take away from this paper is that it is possible to at least recover something of the agency or voice or even just volition of individuals who are otherwise completely silent in history.